A coast too early. In the year 1513, a Turkish admiral named Piri Reis drew a map. That in itself is not remarkable. Many maps were drawn in that century, some crude, some ornate, all incomplete. But what sets this one apart lies not in what it fails to show, but in what it dares to show a detailed outline of the Antarctic coast, free of ice, with curves too crisp and inlets too precise, with no jagged uncertainty, no guesswork, just the calm assurance of lines that had seen what they described. And yet, in 1513, no man had seen Antarctica, not even its frozen edge. The continent would not be officially recorded until 1820, and even then only as a ghostly silhouette in the mist. What Piri Reis drew had no right to exist, because it did not portray the Antarctica known today, but an older version. One without ice, modern radar, launched into the air and shot through the ice, confirmed only recently what the map had shown 5 centuries ago: the land beneath, the true coastline. The rivers that still run under glaciers, the ridges that no sailor could ever see from sea level. The map was not wrong. It was impossibly right. This is the first fracture. Geologists now tell us the last time Antarctica was ice-free was over 6,000 years ago, a time with no admiral, no compass, no civilization, at least none officially. So where did the map come from? Piri Reis himself left clues in its margin. He spoke of 20 charts and mappi mundi he used, some from the time of Alexander. He never claimed to have seen the southern land, only that he copied it, faithfully, from something older, something now lost. But if his sources no longer exist, why does the copy remain? Some say it survived by accident. Others whisper it survived by design, because the truth it carried was too dangerous to be openly kept. The Topkapi Palace, where the map was found in 1929, had kept it sealed in a bundle of dusty scrolls, not catalogued, not displayed. It emerged only by chance, unrolled in a quiet corner by a scholar searching for something else, a near miss with oblivion. And when it surfaced, the world was not ready. Within months, skeptics dismissed it. They called it a coincidence, said the contours could be artistic flourishes, mistaken for land. But cartographers looked closer. So did military analysts. In the 1960s, Professor Charles Hapgood examined the projection and found it so accurate that the U.S. Air Force acknowledged its precision. Privately, publicly, they remained silent. No one could explain how a 16th century map showed river valleys buried beneath 2 kilometers of ice, except one hypothesis that Piri Reis did not draw Antarctica as it was in his time, but as it had been in a time before, a time no longer remembered. The implications are cold and vast. If such knowledge existed 6,000 years ago, who had it? Where did they go? What else did they map? Was this an isolated fragment that survived a flood of erasure, or part of a library long since burned, and more haunting still, was it meant to remain hidden? Piri Reis's map is not alone. Other maps would follow. Other coastlines drawn too early, too clearly. But this was the first, the line in the ice. The moment the story began to slip. Because the mystery is not just how the map was drawn. The deeper mystery is why no one wanted it to be believed. The parchment came to light not through excavation or archival research, but by something far quieter, a fire. In the summer of 1893, a lightning strike tore through the roof of a hilltop Jesuit monastery in northern Portugal. The flames spread fast, licking through timber and time alike. Monks fled with little more than their lives, and in the smoldering aftermath, a charred room revealed a single bundle that had fallen through floorboards into a stone vault below. The parchment inside was brittle, edges curled like dried leaves, but its surface was nearly untouched. It bore no writing, only lines. Lines impossibly fine. A map. At first glance, the shapes were familiar: the curve of Iberia, the hook of Britain, the arc of West Africa. But there was something wrong with the ink. It didn't flake, it didn't fade. Under magnification, it shimmered faintly with a metallic sheen. Later, under forensic analysis, it resisted classification. Carbon was expected, so was iron gall. But this ink contained a compound not used in any known ink formulation before the 20th century silicon. Not a trace of this compound appears in any European pigment record prior to 1927. And yet here it was, bonded to parchment dated by 3 independent labs to the early 1500s. A silent contradiction. A cartographic impossibility. The map showed Europe, yes, but also coastlines no one should have drawn. A northern route into the Americas. Bays along Labrador. A polar strait west of Greenland. None of it labeled. No compass rose. No latitude markings. But each feature was meticulously rendered. The shorelines razor sharp. Not sketched, but measured. The parchment had no signature, no watermark. Nothing to tie it to any known expedition, but folded within it was a single sliver of paper, bearing 2 words in Latin custodi lucem: guard the light. Researchers, cautious by training, offered speculation. Perhaps the map was created later, using older parchment. But even if the skin was reused, how did the ink bond so cleanly? And why would someone use such an exotic substance for a forgery no one was ever meant to find? Others proposed a simpler answer. The map was not European at all. It had entered the monastery through unknown means, perhaps a gift, perhaps a relic of some deeper mission. Jesuit records. Sparse and vague. Mention a fragment of the East delivered in 1574 retrieved from a dying missionary in Goa. The entry includes no description, just an annotation delirium or divine, and then silence. But one scholar noticed something more. The mapping style bore subtle resemblance to early Ming Dynasty cartography, not in the geography, but in the curvature of the coasts, the proportion of river mouths, a style no European used, not then, not even now. Was this the product of East-West contact far earlier than textbooks allow? The idea is dismissed in academic circles, though never conclusively. Too little is known. Too much remains unproven, and yet the map refuses to fade. What draws deeper intrigue is not what the map shows, but what it omits. Major European cities are absent. So are religious symbols, political borders, and even mountain ranges. This is not a map for travelers. It is not made for conquest. It is a coastline-only rendering. Sparse, functional, pure. Some compare it to a navigation chart. But if so, it's unlike any known portolan. It curves not with wind, but with silence. It seems designed not for ships hugging shores, but for someone watching from above. Here lies the unease. How did a map in the early 16th century, or earlier, display such technical mastery? And why was it made with ink no one could explain, containing silicon particles that bond to parchment like modern industrial compounds? Even today, laboratories struggle to replicate the sample's precise composition. The process appears deliberate, layered, as if someone knew how to build permanence into the stroke. The monastery has no records of where the parchment came from, and yet it kept it, hidden in a chamber beneath the chapel floor. Not archived, not indexed, just protected. For centuries, the silence around it is telling. Monasteries catalog. They annotate. But this map was neither studied nor shared. It was sealed, almost as if it wasn't meant for interpretation, only for survival. When the Vatican was discreetly asked to assist in dating the ink as part of a broader effort to authenticate the document, the request was denied. No explanation. No further comment. Just a letter stating, plainly, that the Church does not hold relevant samples. No one had said it did. The parchment now rests in a temperature-controlled archive in Lisbon. Access is restricted, not for its fragility, but for its controversy. It contradicts too much. Its presence is an itch in the fabric of accepted history. Something too early, too perfect, and too silent. But perhaps silence was the point. There's an old Jesuit proverb, rarely quoted veritas non semper libertatem dat. Truth does not always grant freedom. Some knowledge, they believed, was to be endured, not shared. Hidden not to deceive, but to protect. So the question remains, protect whom? Was the parchment part of a broader memory that survived long enough to be drawn, but not explained? Was it copied from something older, something rescued in flight from fire, flood, or war? Or was it one of many, a single page from an atlas that no longer has a name? More unsettling still, what if others existed, not hidden by monks, but destroyed, not forgotten, but erased? And if this one survived a fire only by accident, how many others fell not through floorboards, but through history itself? A tablet lay half buried in the dust of Sippar, a city long surrendered to sand. When it was uncovered in the late 19th century by an expedition mapping ancient Mesopotamian ruins, no one expected it to change the way the sky itself was read. It was clay, modest in size, and cracked along the top edge but intact enough to preserve a cluster of markings that puzzled even seasoned epigraphers. These were not lists of kings or prayers to forgotten gods. These were coordinates, star names, angular separations, a map, but not of Earth. It was labeled, simply, in Akkadian script positions above. At first, scholars thought it an astronomical chart, one of many created by the Babylonian priest astronomers known for their precise tracking of celestial events. But something was wrong. The measurements described not constellations from Babylon's sky, but something else. Angles that could only align if observed from a much higher latitude far to the north, perhaps beyond the Arctic Circle. And the stars themselves were listed in groupings unfamiliar to the region, hinting at a system older than the canonical zodiac. In time, more tablets were found, some in Sippar, others near Eridu. Each bore similar arrangements, all pointing to positions not easily visible from Mesopotamia. Cross-referencing with modern sky maps revealed an unsettling truth. The positions were not just accurate, they were time-bound. They described the sky as it would have appeared more than 10,000 years ago. This was long before any known civilization in that region had developed writing, agriculture, or city walls. Before history, in the formal sense, even began. The conclusion faced immediate resistance. Most historians dismissed it as either coincidence or misinterpretation. Perhaps the Babylonians had copied older records without understanding them. Perhaps a scribe had made an error. But the consistency of the data across multiple sites and the mathematical clarity of the notation made such theories untenable. These weren't scribbles, they were measurements, and they were deliberate. So, where had they come from? One theory proposes that survivors of a lost civilization, perhaps one destroyed by the Younger Dryas cataclysm around 12 to 800 years ago, passed their astronomical knowledge down in fragments, carried through oral tradition, embedded in myth, preserved in tablets long after the meaning had been obscured. If so, the tablets are more than relics. They are fossils of memory, echoes of a world that mapped the heavens with greater fidelity than we thought possible. Another detail deepened the mystery. One particular tablet, stored now in the British Museum, showed not only stars but angular arcs along what appeared to be latitude lines not of the sky, but of Earth. Some of these lines intersected at points corresponding with ancient sites now buried beneath desert and forest. Others aligned with submerged coastlines now far beneath the sea. No known culture from the 3rd millennium BCE had reason to chart Earth in this way. They had no concept of latitude, no reason to plot equatorial curves. And yet here it was, baked into clay by hands that knew precisely what they were doing. What's more, the curves weren't theoretical. They matched the Earth's actual curvature with a precision measurable in modern degrees. Not symbolic, not schematic. Actual curvature. It suggests something that should not be true, that someone knew the Earth was round and had measured it long before Eratosthenes ever watched the sun's shadow fall at noon. Even the symbols used to represent angles and distances seem uncannily modern. Not in form, but in function. A double wedge mark indicates half-degree precision. Another sign, once thought decorative, aligns with present-day trigonometric functions. This raises a chilling possibility. What if these aren't records made by ancient astronomers struggling to understand the cosmos, but fragments of instruction copied, repeated, and replicated by scribes unaware of the full system they were preserving? There is precedent. Ancient civilizations often mimicked forms they no longer fully grasped. Rituals retained long after meaning faded. Symbols kept alive like lanterns in the dark, waiting for someone to see by them again. If the Babylonian star tablets are echoes, what was the original voice? Perhaps these coordinates were once part of a global effort, a system of knowledge shared across a forgotten network of coastal settlements, highland observatories, and maritime routes that existed before the last ice age receded. And perhaps when the floods came, or the fire, or the silence, only fragments survived, pressed into clay, buried in silt. Waiting. What's unsettling is not only the idea that such knowledge existed, but that it was targeted. Several tablets unearthed in the 1920s were found smashed deliberately, not broken by time, but shattered by force. In one dig, fragments of at least 3 star maps had been burned, even though the surrounding artifacts remained untouched, as if someone had wanted the sky erased. We know that later empires, fearful of heresy, destroyed what they couldn't control. And as writing became a tool of power, so too did maps, especially maps of the heavens. To control the sky's story was to control time itself, which brings us to a strange footnote. A set of medieval Latin texts held in the Vatican refer to the Cartae Siderae star charts from the eastern sands said to contain forbidden alignments. The texts do not describe the charts, only that they were sealed in silence, for they turn time backwards. No one has seen these charts. No one will say if they were real. But the phrase appears in at least 3 different letters between clergy in the 15th century, always whispered, always bracketed by warnings. It is unclear if the Vatican ever possessed the tablets or merely feared them. But the reaction speaks volumes. Some maps are not meant to be shared. Some knowledge, when it reappears, is buried again. And so the Sippar tablet rests quietly in its case, labeled astronomical chart, with no mention of the coordinates it contains or the implications of their age. Visitors pass by, unaware. Scholars write papers, but no one asks the deeper question. If someone could chart the sky from a latitude far north of Babylon 10,000 years ago who stood there to look, the slab was first mistaken for a grinding stone. It lay exposed on a ridge above the Pacific coast of Ecuador, half swallowed by root and moss, its surface worn but not ruined. Locals had used it as a step to a goat path for generations, unaware that beneath their feet lay something carved, something meant to be read. Only when construction work disturbed the ground in 1972 did archaeologists notice the parallel incisions, too deliberate, too consistent, too precise to be natural. After cleaning, the slab revealed a set of grooves and raised nodes in a pattern both intricate and unfamiliar. It measured just under 2 meters in length, hewn from basalt, dense and resistant to erosion. Along one edge, a curved line traced a crescent-like arc, crossing over scattered depressions, each positioned with eerie regularity. At first, it was thought to be a form of calendar. But one researcher, trained in oceanography, saw something else. It wasn't a calendar. It was a chart. Not of the land, but of the sea. The depressions matched known Pacific island positions, including some long-submerged seamounts and vanished atolls documented only by sonar in the late 20th century. The arc resembled the path of the equatorial current. The grooves ran parallel to known wind patterns, but the alignment held only when the slab was oriented at a tilt, specifically 7 degrees off modern north. A discrepancy matching the Earth's axial shift estimated to have occurred over 10,000 years ago. What it suggested was almost unthinkable. Someone had mapped Pacific oceanography, winds, currents, island chains, in stone, thousands of years before satellite imaging or deep-sea sounding. More disturbing, the slab showed landforms no longer visible, islands now drowned, ridges now buried beneath hundreds of meters of ocean. One formation near the center corresponded almost exactly with Zealandia, a submerged continent only formally acknowledged by geologists in 2017. But this was no modern artifact. Thermoluminescence dating placed the stone's last exposure to sunlight at roughly 12,400 years ago, just before the onset of the Younger Dryas, the sudden cooling event that ended the last ice age, just before massive sea level rise reshaped every coastline on Earth. The carving had survived by accident, buried under vegetation, ignored, forgotten, and then revealed. No written language accompanied it. No script, no symbol, no signature. But the method of depiction, nodes for islands, grooves for flow, raised arcs for prevailing winds, mirrored the Polynesian stick charts used for navigation. Yet this slab predated the earliest known Polynesian voyaging by at least 10 millennia. It raised a deeper question. Did these navigational principles originate in Polynesia, or were they inherited, echoes of something far older? Some ethnographers pointed to oral traditions among Pacific Islanders that speak of great voyages from a homeland now lost beneath the sea. The legends differ by language and region, but one element repeats the homeland was mapped in stone, smooth, black stone. This matched the slab's material and its function. It was not art, it was information. But who would have needed such a tool? Mariners require mobility. Stones resist movement, unless the chart was not meant to be carried, but to be taught. In this view, the slab was a memory anchor, a place where elders instructed the next generation of voyagers, using tactile points to embed knowledge beyond sight, a classroom of basalt and salt wind, with the ocean itself as textbook. If so, then its preservation suggests continuity, a lineage of navigational memory that outlived the homeland it once described. But the mystery doesn't end with the slab's content. When researchers attempted to recreate its hydrodynamic accuracy using computer models, they found the carved flow paths anticipated seasonal current shifts, ones not visible from the surface. This implies not just observation, but long-term study, systematic understanding, knowledge that required time, continuity, and an awareness of forces invisible to the naked eye. How could such a system exist before cities, before writing, before even pottery in some regions? Some propose the existence of an earlier maritime culture, one based not on settlement, but movement. A seafaring civilization whose monuments were roots, not walls, whose memory was held not in books, but in stone and star. If such a culture existed, it would have left few traces. Boats rot, harbors submerge, but charts, especially ones carved in stone, might remain. If even one survives, what others lie undiscovered, moss-covered on hillsides mistaken for debris or altar. The Ecuador slab now rests in a regional museum, displayed without fanfare. The plaque calls it a prehistoric cartographic device of unknown origin. Its deeper implications are not mentioned. There is no reference to drowned continents, no suggestion of civilizations unacknowledged. Only the shape remains. The groove, the line. The silent logic etched in a time no longer charted. In 1984, a second stone was found 80 kilometers inland, similar in material but heavily eroded. Its markings were faint, almost obliterated, but one curve still matched a current known to pass off the coast of Peru during El Niño years. The idea that these stones tracked climate rhythms began to circulate, though few dared publish it. If true, they are not only maps, but instruments of time. One investigator noted a sequence of notches along the slab's base, shallow, uniform, rhythmically spaced. When mapped against lunar calendars, they approximated a 6-year tidal cycle, not exact, but close. Too close to dismiss as chance. This opens another possibility, that the slab did not merely describe geography, it recorded memory, shifts, anomalies, the difference between what was and what would be. In this reading, it becomes not only a map of the world, but of change. That is what makes it dangerous. To acknowledge such knowledge forces a revision, not of local history, but of human capacity, of how long we have been watching the tides, and who taught us to do so. For if memory can be carved in stone and made to last, what else has been written, unseen, beneath our feet? The stones inside the sanctuary held no words, only curves. They rose from the floor like petals of a blackened lotus, arranged in concentric rings beneath the central tower of a forgotten level of Angkor. Hidden behind later walls, below the main temple's sanctum, was a chamber sealed not with doors, but with silence. It was uncovered in 2011 when structural repair exposed a shaft long thought to lead nowhere. Dust cloaked every surface. The air was still. And in the center of the chamber, beneath layers of hardened bat guano and centuries of darkness, the pattern emerged. There were no deities carved on the walls, no dancers, no battles, no prayers, only orbit-like grooves etched across polished stone, looping in elliptical trails, each one marked at intervals by deepened notches. Archaeologists speculated they were symbolic, perhaps cosmological, perhaps ritual. But the alignments told another story. Each curve mirrored the path of a celestial body. Not the sun. Not the moon. But planets. The longest curve traced the eccentric orbit of Mars. Another matched Venus's 584-day cycle, corrected for Earth's own rotation. The smallest mirrored Mercury's swift circuit around the sun. And then, At the center, a circular depression no wider than a coin, perfectly smooth, aligned with the exact coordinates of Earth's equator. There were no inscriptions to explain it, no legends to frame it. Yet the pattern reflected an understanding of orbital mechanics that should not have existed in Southeast Asia over 1,000 years ago. Angkor rose in the 12th century. Telescopes came centuries later. Kepler's laws, the very language of elliptical motion, would not be articulated until the 1600s. But here, beneath the stone, they had been carved in form. When models were overlaid onto the design, the match was undeniable. This was not decoration. It was measurement, and the measurements were precise. The anomaly drew little public attention. The chamber was deemed structurally unstable and resealed. Official reports described it only as a non-ritual substructure of geometric complexity. But among those who studied it, quietly, obsessively, a theory began to form. The curves were not symbolic representations of the heavens. They were records, tracks, time capsules of planetary motion carved into stone not to worship the gods but to mark their passage. A cosmological observatory hidden in darkness, left not to be seen but to be remembered. There is no record of such knowledge being known to the Khmer Empire. None of the royal inscriptions speak of astronomy beyond basic solar and lunar alignments. No temple plan includes planetary layout. And yet this chamber suggests that, at some point, someone within the empire had access to knowledge far more advanced than the context allows. Where could it have come from? Some researchers noted that the architectural proportions of Angkor Wat itself mimic the solar calendar. The central tower's height to the outer wall distance forms a ratio approximating Earth's distance to the Sun in lunar units. Too close, they say, to be coincidence. And the temple's axial alignment, offset just slightly from true east, corresponds with the rising point of Venus on a specific 5-point synodic cycle. But that knowledge might be inferred, observed through centuries. What the chamber beneath the temple implies is different. It is predictive. It understands the rhythm, the pattern, the recurrence. Not just that things move, but how they move, and why. It is the difference between watching the stars and knowing where they will be. The chamber's floor bore another detail. Along the outermost groove, barely visible, ran a sequence of dots, 365 in number, evenly spaced, save for a deliberate gap on the 93rd marker. A pause, an absence. When plotted against Earth's orbital progression, it marked the date of perihelion, the point when Earth is closest to the Sun. It's a fact not observable by eye. It requires calculation, long-term observation, and comparison of seasonal shifts. And yet, here it was, marked not in ink, but in stone. There is a Khmer myth seldom recited outside monastic circles. It tells of those who watched from the mountain that moved, beings who came before the builders, who traced circles in dust and taught the stones to follow the sky. Most regarded as allegory, a poetic echo. But when placed beside the chamber's structure, the line grows harder to ignore. Perhaps the chamber was not built by the Angkorians, but inherited. There is precedence. Many ancient sites were constructed atop older foundations, layers lost to time. Civilizations bearing the memory of those before, not to erase, but to build upon. Stones reused, patterns adapted. The builders may not have understood what they preserved. They only knew it mattered. But what if someone did understand? In the 1920s, a French explorer documented a series of copper scrolls found in a nearby ruin. The inscriptions were never translated. They vanished during the war. But his notes included one phrase, repeated 3 times. Do not open the orbit. The key is not time. It makes little sense, but taken alongside the chamber, it reads like a warning. If these carvings are records, they imply a system, a knowledge of planetary behavior not just for observation, but for alignment, coordination, perhaps even correspondence. What could such knowledge serve, navigation prophecy or something stranger? One fringe theory suggests the chamber's layout matches the harmonic resonance of orbital nodes, points where gravitational forces intersect, creating stable paths through space. It's speculative, dismissed by most, but the match is not entirely baseless. And that leads to one final observation. When radar scanning was performed on Angkor's foundations during a structural survey, technicians reported anomalies below the known subchambers, echoes, voids, narrow shafts leading deeper still, but no excavation has followed. The site is considered sacred, untouched. Yet those who heard the echo say the signal returned something strange, a resonance, not noise, not void, but tone, as if something beneath still responds, waiting for a pattern to repeat. Beyond the last cataract of the Nile, where the river begins to fray into streams and marshes, lies a stretch of delta no longer visible on any modern map. It once marked the southernmost reach of ancient navigation, a place where traders from Kush, priests from Thebes, and cartographers of unknown origin once converged. Today, it is a quiet region, half swallowed by sand and agriculture, its ancient paths lost beneath irrigation canals. But in 1934, a British expedition digging along an old Roman road stumbled upon a tablet buried beneath compacted clay, a fragment of granite inscribed with grooves so delicate they escaped notice until rain revealed their shine. The carving showed no text, no dates, no names, only channels, branching, weaving, bifurcating. A network of watercourses etched with an intimacy that suggested lived familiarity. At first, the channels were mistaken for representations of the Nile itself, but the configuration didn't match. The paths curved differently. The flow diverged where none should. When overlaid onto current satellite imagery, the discrepancy became clearer. The grooves described a river that no longer exists, a ghost delta, entirely erased. Hydrological modeling, using soil samples and sediment deposits, eventually confirmed the impossible. The area once bore a second delta, likely fed by a tributary now dry for millennia. The model suggested a flow pattern consistent with a water source originating far to the west, perhaps once connecting to what is now the Chad Basin. This would imply a river cutting laterally across the Sahara, from the heart of Africa to the Nile, a river no historical text ever recorded, a corridor lost not only to geography, but to memory. The implications are unsettling. If such a river existed, it would have enabled travel, trade, and transmission between regions long thought isolated. It would explain certain anomalies, Saharan cave paintings of boats, papyrus found far inland, and trade goods in Sahelian tombs with Egyptian motifs. It would connect civilizations not through slow caravan, but through swift current. And yet, no maps remain. No scrolls mention it, except perhaps this one stone. More strange is the precision of the carving. The scale matches known geographic distances, adjusted for curvature. The deltas are drawn with hydrological logic, tributaries thinning as they branch, channels widening toward the terminal mouth. Whoever made the map understood not just the shape of water, but its behavior, its memory. Researchers dated the slab through comparative erosion and quarry records, estimating it to be at least 3,800 years old. This places it within the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, a time of expansion and engineering. But the river it describes had already vanished by then, swallowed by shifting sands and tectonic uplift thousands of years prior. Meaning, the map was either copied from something older or created from memory of something already lost. This is where the record breaks. No accompanying artifacts were found. No temple or settlement nearby. Just a single map carved with care and buried in a place where it would be forgotten. Almost as if someone wanted it hidden. Preserved. A whisper in stone. Theories vary. Some suggest the map is evidence of an older civilization, predating dynastic Egypt, that once controlled vast stretches of now arid land, a maritime culture adapted not to seas, but to rivers. When the waters vanished, so did their cities, their archives, their names. Others believe the stone is the work of a lone scribe scholar who compiled oral accounts of a legendary waterway and preserved them in the only language time understands, carved rock. But a third theory chills more deeply, that the river was erased not by nature, but by intention. There are precedents. Conquerors divert rivers to control populations. Empires drain wetlands to prevent rebellion. But erasing a river from history, from record, requires more than earthworks. It demands silence. A concerted decision to forget. To remove not just presence, but memory. The context grows darker when considering a passage found in a rarely translated stele from Karnak. It speaks of the gate behind the waters and warns, "Let no map draw the mouths that lie beyond." Scholars dismiss it as metaphor, a poetic admonition against hubris, but if taken literally, it aligns too closely. A forbidden delta, a region not to be recorded, a geography declared unspeakable. The question then is why? What lay beyond that gate? What truth flowed with the vanished current? Was it merely trade, or something more corrosive to the order of empires, an exchange of knowledge of origin, myths, of cosmologies, too divergent to assimilate? One fringe scholar noted that the configuration of the lost river bears resemblance to star paths in certain Nubian sky charts. The bifurcation mirrors Orion's belt as it descends toward the horizon. A reach, then a fork, then a vanishing point. Too poetic to be proof, but not too poetic to be pattern. Others point to geological anomalies, magnetic disruptions along the former riverbed, mineral compositions inconsistent with local formations, as if the river had cut through something unnatural or imported. Could the river have served as more than conduit, a line not just of water, but of alignment, an axis binding space to time, sight to sky? If so, its erasure was not just political, but cosmological. Today, the site is overgrown. The slab remains unmarked in a regional depot, its significance reduced to a footnote in a survey. Most who pass it do not know what it depicts. Even those who read the report seldom understand the map's silence. But silence, in maps, speaks loudest. It tells us not only what is present, but what is missing. Not only what was drawn, but what was forbidden. And if a river could be erased, its memory buried, its lines unspoken, what else has been removed? What other gates have been sealed behind the curtain of sand? Their directions scrubbed from every chart, their names struck from every tongue. In the cool silence of a subterranean corridor beneath the Apostolic Palace, a room exists with no door. At least, not one in use. Its original entrance was sealed sometime in the late 18th century, during renovations following a fire in the north wing. The space was deemed inaccessible, irrelevant, even forgotten. But archival floor plans preserved a faint outline, a square chamber tucked between two structural walls, once labeled quadrans obscurus, the dark quadrant. In 1998, a minor earthquake near Rome disturbed part of the foundation. A crack appeared in the masonry of the lower archive, revealing a narrow void behind. Engineers investigating structural integrity lowered a camera through the fissure and glimpsed, briefly, a room coated in dust and silence. What caught their eye was not architecture, but geometry. The floor was inlaid with polished slate, unnaturally smooth, arranged in concentric rings divided by radial grooves. A kind of map, but not of land, not of sea. It resembled a quadrant, a navigational tool magnified to the scale of a room. At the center lay a circular depression, untouched by dust, as if something had once rested there, something now gone. No official entry was made. The room was resealed. The crack was filled, but footage was quietly archived, mislabeled as structural footage, and filed away. Later, a whistleblower within the archive leaked stills to a private scholar. The images, grainy and low resolution, show enough. The rings match the angular increments of a sextant, but they extend beyond known use, reaching values unnecessary for ocean navigation. One groove arcs to 66.6 degrees, the latitude of the Antarctic Circle. This detail alone might be ignored. But another ring curves precisely at 23.5 degrees, Earth's axial tilt. These are not arbitrary numbers. They are planetary constants, embedded in stone, hidden in a vault no one was meant to enter. What kind of map measures the inclination of Earth? Not a traveler's map, not a merchant's, but perhaps a map of alignment. Some believe the quadrant was used to track celestial events, to predict eclipses, solstices, or precession cycles. Others suggest it was part of a broader schema, a tool for synchronizing actions with planetary rhythms. But what actions and why hidden here at the heart of ecclesiastical power? An inventory list from 1774 includes a cryptic item, tabula declinata, sine legenda, or tilted chart without legend. No other reference to this chart appears in Vatican records. It is listed without location, no author, no description, only that it was not to be displayed. The context deepens when considering the timing. That same year, the Church banned several works from circulation, including texts on Copernican cosmology and esoteric interpretations of planetary influence. The decree came not just from theological concern, but from fear. Fear that old knowledge, once buried, was resurfacing. If the quadrant beneath the palace is what it appears to be, a tool for celestial mapping beyond conventional use, then its concealment makes sense. Not for blasphemy, but for power, to keep the rhythm of the heavens aligned only to those who understood its purpose. One obscure letter from the Archivum Secretum, written in Latin with portions in cipher, references a rotunda beneath the seat of Peter and warns, "The circle must not be broken, for in its measure lies the interval." What interval? What was being timed? Some have connected the chamber's design to ancient Sumerian structures, particularly the so-called star pits, depressions lined with bricks, used to track the slow crawl of stars over centuries. If the Vatican quadrant served a similar function, it implies the Church inherited not just texts, but instruments, artifacts, perhaps even maps of time. There's also the matter of the missing object. The depression at the center of the room, smooth, circular, free of dust, suggests recent absence. Some speculated once held a sphere, a globe, or an orb etched with data, a memory device, a seed of geometry passed through generations. This matches accounts from the Renaissance describing a stone of measure, kept under lock, said to contain the long curve of the firmament, The object disappeared during the Napoleonic looting of Rome. Officially, it never existed. And yet, the depression remains. The concept of knowledge held but not shared recurs throughout ecclesiastical history. Not erased, but secluded. Not denied, but delayed. Stored for a time when it might be understood or weaponized. The quadrant may be part of such a tradition. A quiet chamber not meant for congregation, but calculation. The precision suggests purpose, but the silence suggests fear. Why else bury a map beneath the world's most guarded archive? Some whisper that the Church once feared not heresy from without, but remembrance from within. That certain truths, if revealed too soon, might unravel not just theology, but time itself. The quadrant, then, becomes more than a navigational relic. It becomes a calendar of recurrence, a gauge of cycles, a reminder that what was may be again. Today, no official comment has been made. The room does not exist. The footage is discredited. The documents, apocryphal. And yet, the pattern is consistent. Knowledge drawn, hidden, forgotten, then almost revealed. And always, just before the truth resurfaces, the door is sealed again. Beneath a chapel in Toledo, hidden behind an altar dedicated to Saint Isidore, lies a staircase that descends into silence. The entrance is narrow, just wide enough for a man to pass sideways, carved directly into the bedrock. No records mention its construction. No blueprints chart its depth. It was discovered by accident in 1969 when restoration workers shifted a cracked tile and heard the hollow echo beneath. Descending with lanterns, they found a crypt, dry, cold, sealed for centuries, and in the center of the chamber, a single object wrapped in oxidized copper mesh, a cube, not large, not ornate, but impossibly precise. Each side measured exactly 22 centimeters. The angles met with uncanny perfection. No chisel marks, no tool residue, just smooth, dark stone with a surface that absorbed light rather than reflected it. When first examined, it was thought to be basalt. But tests revealed something stranger, an alloyed composition of silicate, hematite, and an unknown bonding agent that resisted all attempts at replication, a synthetic stone. Manufactured, engineered. On its northern face, a pattern of grooves formed a shallow relief. Not letters, not pictographs, but an abstract lattice, like the intersection of waveforms frozen in motion. The cube, when aligned to magnetic north, displayed another anomaly. The grooves acted as a kind of resonator. A soft vibration could be felt, not audible, not measurable, but present. Researchers described it as a hum beneath the skin. Subtle. Persistent. Like the memory of sound. They called it la piedra muda, the mute stone. The cube was stored briefly in Madrid, then transferred to a secure vault under ecclesiastical authority. Officially, it is classified as archaeological object of undetermined origin. Unofficially, its implications ran deeper. The chapel above was built in the 12th century, but the stone is older, much older. Thermoluminescence dating places its last exposure to sunlight at roughly 10,000 BCE. That predates not only the chapel, but every known structure in Iberia. Its preservation in the crypt was not the result of accident. It was placed there deliberately, protected by architecture constructed around it. The cube had been hidden, not lost. The room in which it rested bore other signs. The walls, though plain at first glance, revealed under infrared scanning a sequence of etched arcs, concentric circles intersected by radial lines, a map, perhaps, a grid, or something closer to a clock. Each line corresponded to astronomical ratios, the synodic periods of Venus, Mars, Jupiter. The pattern resembled the harmonics of orbital resonance. This was not religious art, it was calculation. But the most curious feature appeared during a rare seismic event in 1977. A tremor just outside Toledo triggered a brief activation. The cube, untouched, began to emit heat. Not much, just a single degree above ambient temperature, but enough to trigger instruments, enough to record. Within 6 hours, it returned to stasis. No explanation has been found. Theories vary wildly. Some believe it is a relic of a lost civilization, an artifact encoded with harmonic data, perhaps used to synchronize rituals or track planetary cycles. Others go further, proposing that the cube is a kind of memory core, not technological in the modern sense, but informational. A physical compression of knowledge into geometric form, not meant to be read, meant to be felt. One hypothesis, fringe even among alternative researchers, suggests the grooves on its surface align with Schumann resonances, the electromagnetic frequencies naturally emitted by Earth's atmosphere. If true, the cube is not only recording something, it is tuned to a planetary rhythm. A heartbeat in stone. But if it was a tool, who used it? Local legend in Toledo speaks of Los Calados, the quiet ones, figures who appeared at the edges of kingdoms, cloaked and unnamed, always near moments of upheaval. Some tales say they carried stones that whispered in the dark, that they listened, not spoke, that they waited. Of course, these are stories, superstitions, and yet the cube exists. It should not. There is no known method by which a stone of that composition could be crafted with such precision in the Pleistocene. No culture is credited with metallurgy at that time. No tools survive from which such an object could emerge. And yet it sits, unbroken, undecayed, with surfaces sharper than surgical steel, and still humming. The hum defies analysis. It is not sound, not vibration, not frequency in the conventional sense. But those who have touched the cube speak of dreams after, of patterns, of tunnels, of stars shifting across ceilings they could not name. One physicist, allowed brief contact in 1983, refused to speak afterward. He resigned his position, moved to a monastery. When asked why, he said only, "It remembers too much." The cube is no longer available for study. It was reclaimed by the church in 1994 and its current location is classified. All documentation pertaining to its analysis has been moved to closed archives. Those who worked with it have signed silence agreements. It has become, effectively, a myth. But the chapel remains, and beneath it, the sealed staircase, a place not built for worship, but for containment. Because some maps are not made of ink or lines. Some are carved into stone, not to guide, but to guard. And when such maps begin to hum, the silence that follows is not ignorance, it is protection. On the edge of the Black Sea, in the hills above Sinop, shepherds once spoke of a stone that whispered in fog. No one believed them. The region, known more for its wind and salt than for relics, had long escaped serious archaeological attention. Until 2004, when landslides revealed a chamber carved into the cliffside, its entrance veiled behind collapsed cedar roots and lichen-darkened stone. The chamber was small, no more than 5 meters across, and empty, save for a single bronze disc mounted into the floor. At first glance, it resembled a shield, but too smooth, too unblemished, too deliberate. When unearthed, the metal glinted not with rust but with dull sheen. like sunlight through oil. The disk bore no inscription, no symbol, only a set of concentric rings divided by faint radial lines, not engraved, but inlaid with darker alloy, almost black, absorbing light. Each ring bore tiny indentations, evenly spaced, too numerous for decoration. Some counted 365 in the outermost circle, others 260. Still, others followed no count at all. They spiraled inward, like time collapsing. The disk was removed under state authority and transported to a lab in Ankara. Preliminary metallurgical analysis found something curious. The alloy contained traces of iridium, a metal rare on Earth, more common in meteorites. More troubling, the ratio of nickel to iron mirrored compositions found in known impact fragments, suggesting the disk had been fashioned from extraterrestrial material. But who in prehistory could have smelted such an object, and for what purpose? The site around it offered no clues. No artifacts, no bones, no script. Just a sealed chamber and a disk aligned precisely to true north. Not magnetic, but geographic. A feat requiring knowledge of Earth's axial tilt and curvature. A feat impossible without instruments not discovered for thousands of years after. The pattern of indentations became the focus. When mapped radially and compared with solar and lunar cycles, researchers found alignment with eclipse intervals, not just annual but multi-year Saros cycles, the 18-year rhythm by which eclipses repeat. The disk, it seemed, recorded not days or seasons, but shadows, celestial veils drawn across the sun and moon, fixed in metal long before Babylon tracked them in cuneiform. This was not a calendar, it was an eclipse engine. Such precision in bronze was unknown in Anatolia's prehistory. No local culture is credited with metallurgy this refined before the Iron Age. The carving technique, under microscopy, showed layered striations inconsistent with hand tools, notched not by pressure but by frequency, as if etched with vibration, as if the metal remembered its shaping. One scholar noted the resemblance to the Antikythera mechanism, the ancient Greek astronomical device found off the coast of Crete. But that machine bore gears. This bore silence. It did not move. It waited. A peculiar detail emerged during infrared analysis. The disk, when exposed to shifting temperature gradients, displayed thermal patterns along its radial lines, subtle pulses, like veins under skin, tracing paths of warmth that moved counterclockwise over hours. Not natural, not random. As if the object responded to time, or carried it. That year, a seismologist visiting the site noted an unusual reading. Standing over the original chamber, his equipment recorded a low-frequency oscillation, inaudible to the human ear, emanating from the disk's former location. A hum buried in stone, pulsing every 8.6 seconds. When traced, the frequency matched a known Earth resonance associated with tidal movement. A planetary breath, echoed in metal. But the most disturbing detail came later. When attempts were made to replicate the disk's design using modern alloys and CNC machining, the replicas failed, not in shape, but in function. They remained inert. No thermal response. No resonance. The original, when briefly returned to the chamber for calibration, reactivated, its radial grooves warming in sequence as the sun crossed the horizon. A delayed echo, as if it recognized alignment. Local stories speak of watchers, figures who arrived not by road but by sea, who carried no weapons, only instruments, and who vanished when the stars changed. One fragment of folk song, recorded in 1897, mentions the mirror that knew when the sky would blink, a poetic metaphor dismissed until the disk was found. Was the object a tool of observation, a clock, a beacon, or something stranger? If it tracked eclipses, it implies a purpose beyond agriculture. Eclipses were not mere celestial curiosities. They were omens, triggers, markers of turning points. A culture that could predict them held not just scientific power, but symbolic control. The ability to name the unseen, to prepare for the veil. Yet this disk did not predict. It recorded. Not future, but pattern. Not prophecy, but recurrence. It was a map, but of darkness, of intervals between shadow and shadow. What unsettled researchers most was the central depression, smooth, finger-sized, like the place where something once fit, a lens, a gem, a key. Whatever it was, it's gone. Perhaps removed, perhaps lost, but without it, the disk is incomplete, like a sentence missing its final word. The object now resides in a secure vault. Publicly, it is categorized as an ornamental astrological plate of unknown origin. The chamber in Sinop has since been sealed again, for safety, they said. Erosion risk, instability. But those who saw the grooves before it vanished remember the feeling beneath their skin, the sensation not of watching, but of being watched. Because a map, when complete, does not only show where you are, it shows when. And when a map knows its moment, it no longer waits, it remembers. High in the Peruvian Andes, where the air thins and the sun sharpens every shadow, there stands a platform with no apparent function. Locals call it Piedra del Silencio, the stone of silence. To most, it is merely an ancient foundation, a weathered stage of andesite blocks, each cut with that unshakable Incan precision that defies blade or mortar. But the structure does not align with the rest of the ruins nearby. It faces no cardinal point, mimics no solar alignment. Instead, its edge curves subtly, like a crescent, tracing something unseen in the landscape. In 2002, a team of acousticians brought sensitive recording equipment to the site during a cultural preservation survey. One night, while testing natural echoes, they discovered a phenomenon not documented in any literature. When a low-frequency tone was emitted near the center of the platform, the sound refracted, not randomly, not echoing, but folding along the arc, as though guided by a structure hidden beneath the stone. The frequency was not amplified, but modulated, tuned. Subsequent tests revealed that only certain tones activated the phenomenon, all clustered between 18 and 22 Hz, a range technically beneath human hearing, but known to induce sensations of unease, dizziness, even visions. Infrasound. The stone was a resonator, a massive, silent amplifier. But what was it meant to echo beneath the platform? Ground-penetrating radar uncovered a cavity, not natural, hollowed in precise symmetry with the curve above. A chamber filled with loose stone and dust, inaccessible without risking collapse. From its shape and placement, it became clear the platform was not a foundation. It was a lid, and the frequency was the key. Maps of the area, overlaid with known ley lines and fault zones, revealed another layer. The arc matched a line that connects several ancient sites, Tiwanaku, Silistani, Cusco, each noted for their unexplained acoustics, subterranean chambers, and alignments with both terrestrial and celestial events. The implication was that Piedra del Silencio was not an isolated artifact, but a node, a point on a forgotten grid. When plotted globally, these nodes suggest an alignment too precise to be random, not merely geographic, but geometric. A web of resonance spanning continents, But such a grid would require knowledge of Earth's curvature, its axis, even its subtle seismic song. Who would need such a network, and for what purpose? Some have proposed that the structure functioned as a monitoring station, not for people, but for the planet itself, a place to feel the deep vibrations of tectonic movement, magnetic shifts, or even atmospheric hums. Others believe it responded to things above, not below, measuring not the tremor of Earth, but the pressure of sky. Curiously, several ancient traditions in the Andes speak of huacas, sacred places where the Earth breathes, sites where ancestors could hear the stars whisper, where stone sang without mouth. These were not metaphors. They were instructions, passed from voice to voice, long after the original instruments were forgotten. Even stranger was the presence of a narrow groove, carved along the inner arc of the platform's curve, no wider than a finger. When a quartz rod was placed inside and struck gently, it produced a tone that lingered beyond expectation, not loud, not sharp, but present. A hum that seemed to come from within the mountain itself. Geologists dismissed it as acoustic coincidence. The shape, they argued, merely happened to reflect certain frequencies, but sound engineers who modeled the chamber beneath disagreed. The design was too precise, too intentional. A natural formation might resonate. This one responded. One researcher hypothesized that the site was designed not to produce sound, but to filter it, to isolate a frequency hidden within the ambient noise of the world, a signal among chaos. If so, then someone once knew how to listen deeply, not with ears, but with stone. There is an old Quechua phrase whispered among mountain elders stone remembers where the sky forgets. At first, it seems poetic, but perhaps it is literal. Perhaps stones, when shaped correctly, retain echoes the sky no longer repeats. There is no explanation for how such sonic precision could be achieved without modern tools. The Incas possessed no writing system as we know it. Their quipus, knots of memory, carried numbers, not schematics. And yet, the platform exists. It was built. It functions. But it does not speak openly. When the site is silent, when no one tests, no one listens, the stone sleeps. But in the moments between, when sound crosses its curve and stirs the air beneath, something stirs back. A vibration not felt through skin, but through thought. A reminder, not of language, but of pattern, not of message, but of recurrence. And so the stone remains, unlabeled, unexplained, still called a foundation, though it supports nothing, still ignored by tourists, though it echoes the planet's oldest breath. Because some structures are not monuments. They are instruments, and some maps are drawn not in ink or geometry, but in resonance. In the vaults beneath a monastery in northern Sicily, behind a door sealed with iron and wax, rests a manuscript that few have touched. Its binding is goat hide, darkened by centuries, its pages stiff with salt. The script is not Latin, nor Greek, nor any Romance tongue, but a flowing, angular form that scholars have yet to decipher. The monks who preserve it do not read it. They only guard it. They call it Il Codice del Sussurro, the Codex of the Whisper. It was rediscovered in 1881 during repairs after a lightning strike cracked the western cloister wall. Behind layers of plaster, a hollow was found, and within it, a casket of cedar sealed with pitch. Inside, the manuscript, dry, intact, bound shut with copper wire. A single note accompanied it, written in Latin by a monk named Albinus in 1463. Let no voice read what was meant for the sky. Let the silence keep its pattern. That warning was ignored. Over the next several decades, various linguists and codebreakers attempted translation. None succeeded. The script bore no relation to known alphabets. Some suggested it was cipher, others glossolalia. But one pattern emerged. Each page contained a central diagram, drawn with obsessive precision, circles, lattices, spirals, notations placed in grids, and beneath them, small dots arranged in sequences that varied from page to page. When compiled, the dots matched star positions. Not those visible today, but those from 12,000 years ago, precession adjusted, backward through the wobble of Earth's axis. The diagrams were not art, they were sky maps, but of a sky no longer visible. One page depicted a series of stars clustered around a dark center, labeled only with repeating glyphs. Modern astronomers, overlaying the pattern on known star fields, matched it with the region near Cygnus, specifically the vicinity of the now dormant X-ray source known as Cygnus X1. A black hole, invisible to ancient eyes, known only through 20th century instruments. And yet, here it was, mapped in ink that predates the telescope. The manuscript itself has never been carbon dated. The Church forbids it. They cite fragility, sanctity. But the pages bear watermarking consistent with parchment produced in Syria between the 4th and 7th centuries. Too early for such celestial knowledge, too late for oral tradition to carry sky positions from the Younger Dryas. This raises a question no one wishes to ask aloud: was the codex a copy, not composed by its scribes, but transcribed? Some believe it is a remnant of a longer chain, a line of knowledge passed through initiates, each generation preserving the diagrams even as their meaning eroded. The text itself may be ritual, not meant to explain, only to anchor. A memory palace inked in silence. One curious feature appears in the margins, a recurring symbol resembling an hourglass enclosed in a circle. It appears on 72 of the 108 pages, always at the edge, always tilted slightly clockwise. This symbol has no counterpart in religious symbology, but when rotated and overlaid onto a polar map, it aligns with the spacing of axial tilt over a 26,000-year precessional cycle, the so-called Platonic year. This is not coincidence. Embedded within the manuscript is a memory of movement, not across space, but time. A map not of locations, but of when. In 1939, a Jesuit scholar attempted to reconstruct the diagrams using metal threads laid over a spherical globe. He noted that the intersections formed chords, lines that, when extended, linked not geographic points, but anomalous archaeological sites: Göbekli Tepe, the Osirian, Nan Madol, and an underwater ridge near Yonaguni. He did not publish. His notes, found after his death, include one chilling sentence. They left markers in places no one would think to look, on the skin between epochs. There is no evidence the scribes who copied the codex knew what they preserved. The monastery records mention only that it was kept in the Chapel of Silence, a room sealed except during lunar eclipses, when a single candle was lit and the book placed on an obsidian altar. No readings, no prayers, just the book and the candle and the passing of the Earth's shadow. It was ritual without interpretation, memory without context. The diagrams may encode more than positions. Some have theorized they reflect resonance patterns, the harmonic relationships between celestial bodies and Earth's rotational frequency. One page shows a spiral inscribed with ratios that, when calculated, match Fibonacci intervals. Not exact, but too close to dismiss. Another page, long ignored, shows a series of undulating lines looping around a central void. When modeled digitally, the pattern resembled gravitational lensing, the distortion of light by mass, a phenomenon unobserved until Einstein. Yet rendered here with ink and instinct. There is no way to prove authorship, no way to trace the hand that first drew these stars, but the silence around the codex deepens with each decade. The Vatican has since restricted access. The chamber is monitored. The manuscript now rests under glass, in a climate-controlled vault. Its pages have not been turned in over 20 years. And yet, in dreams, some say they have seen its shapes, not read, felt, as if the diagrams were not meant for eyes, but for minds, as if the stars they trace no longer shine above, but within. North of the Scottish Highlands, beyond where the last heather clings to stone and the peat begins to swallow sound, there stands a mound that locals simply call the Hollow. No signs mark its presence. No trails lead to its curve. It rises gently, unremarkable against the mist and low sky, save for a singular feature, a ring of standing stones, 12 in number, each no taller than a man's waist, worn smooth by centuries of wind but untouched by lichen or moss. They face inward, toward a depression in the earth so shallow it barely casts shadow. Yet when rain falls, the water never pools. It vanishes, as if swallowed. In 1962, a team of hydrologists studying the region's watershed discovered something strange: subterranean water patterns inconsistent with the topography. Flow models suggested a void, a cavern beneath the mound far larger than its modest surface implied. Further survey revealed concentric anomalies in the magnetic field, faint but persistent, like the ghost of a compass rose buried in loam. When excavation began, they found not chambers, but layers. Each stratum of soil beneath the mound had been deliberately arranged, alternating textures of gravel, ash, clay, and something finer than sand but heavier, almost metallic. The sequence repeated every 30 centimeters, forming a rhythmic stratigraphy like pages in a buried book. At the heart, they found a stone slab, polished to mirror-like sheen, despite lying in total darkness for untold centuries. No markings, no seams, just a single indentation in the center, circular, shallow, barely the depth of a thumbprint. What caught attention wasn't what they found, but when. The core samples drawn from the deepest layer dated back over 11,000 years. Before the rise of agriculture, before writing, before the great flood myths that echoed from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica. And still, the mound remained intact, untouched by erosion, preserved beyond reason. The stone slab was removed and transported to Edinburgh. There, under microscopy, researchers discovered an uncanny smoothness, the surface variation measured in nanometers. Too fine for even modern polishing techniques without specialized equipment. No abrasives, no scoring. As if it had not been shaped, but grown. When exposed to infrared light, the stone absorbed every wavelength. It reflected nothing. Yet thermal readings showed internal heat fluctuation, a slow pulse, rising and falling over hours, uncoupled from ambient conditions. A rhythm with no external source. Some suggested geothermal activity, others, chemical instability. But no reaction occurred when the slab was cut, the tools blunted, the surface unyielding. Even diamond-tipped drills failed to mark it. And still, it pulsed. A folklorist brought in from Aberdeen recalled an old legend, not written, but sung, about the stone that dreams where none dare walk. It spoke of a night when stars fell from the sky, and the earth answered by swallowing them. The song ends with a warning. Beneath the silence, the map waits. What kind of map hides under silence the mound itself, when scanned again, revealed another anomaly? The standing stones around its perimeter, though weathered, retained exact spacing. Measured edge to edge, they formed a circle with a radius of 23.4 meters, a figure eerily close to Earth's axial tilt, not 23.5, not approximated, precisely 23.4. Was it intentional or coincidence carved by erosion and time? More compelling still was their orientation. Each stone cast its shortest shadow not at local noon, but at a specific hour 6 days before the summer solstice. When plotted, the shadows formed lines that converged just beyond the western horizon, a point aligned with the rising of Deneb during the Younger Dryas, the tail star of Cygnus. The hollow, it seemed, was not a burial mound. It was an observatory, not for the sky above, but the sky remembered. Why build such a site in a place so remote, so harsh? Perhaps because the silence here was not emptiness, but insulation, a buffer against noise, against change, against forgetting. Some believe the mound was part of a larger complex, a web of ancient instruments meant to preserve knowledge through alignment and structure rather than words or symbols. Others go further, claiming the slab at its heart is not passive, but responsive, that it reflects not light, but intention, that it pulses not heat, but memory. A technician involved in its study later reported strange dreams during the weeks it remained in the lab. He described visions of lattice patterns, intersecting paths that bent like fabric, and a voice, not speaking, but present, asking only one thing. "Do you remember where you came from?" The slab was quietly returned, not to the lab, but to the mound. Without fanfare, without report, they placed it back within the hollow, sealed the layers above, and walked away. Today, no plaque marks the site, no guard stands watch, but locals know not to approach after dark, not out of fear, but reverence. The ground feels different beneath the foot, softer, more patient, and when the wind slows, some say they hear it, a thrum beneath the soil. Not loud, not persistent, but waiting, like a question not yet asked. Deep within the Libyan desert, where wind carves stone into curves and silence presses harder than heat, lies a scar on the earth with no recorded name. A depression so shallow it escapes satellite imagery, yet when surveyed on foot reveals a near-perfect hexagon etched into the bedrock, not by erosion, not by wind, but by incision. The edges, though weather-worn, still catch sunlight with a sharpness that suggests intention. At its center, fused to the floor, is a slab of translucent material, neither quartz nor glass kakitibas, that refracts the sky into a spectrum too narrow for the naked eye. Only through infrared does the true image emerge. The slab reflects nothing of its surroundings. Instead, it projects something else entirely. A faint grid of shifting lines, geometric but fluid, like coordinates unraveling through time. The pattern, while unreadable in motion, was captured frame by frame, and when compiled formed a sequence resembling a rotating projection, not of the Earth, but of star positions in slow orbit, not present day, not even historic, simulated backward. Astronomers who analyzed the model noticed a startling alignment. The star fields depicted the sky from a vantage point at least 10,000 years in the past. From latitude 22 north, longitude 25 east, precisely the slab's location. It was a window not to the stars above, but to a sky that no longer exists. The material itself remains unidentified. It exhibits non-Newtonian optical behavior, bending light differently depending on incident angle, yet never warming under exposure. No known mineral matches its index. A 2007 expedition attempted to drill a sample for lab analysis. The drill broke, the tip melted, yet the slab remained pristine, cool, unstirred, as if protected not by hardness, but refusal. The hexagonal perimeter holds further mystery. Each vertex aligns with distant points across the desert, some marked by collapsed structures, others by nothing at all. But when traced across topography, they form a network of distances corresponding to lunar apogee cycles, the furthest point in the Moon's elliptical orbit. Why would an Earthbound installation track such an arc unless it served to measure tides, gravitational fluctuation, or something subtler, an influence not of mass, but of motion? Inscribed into one of the perimeter stones, barely visible, is a sigil resembling a spiral drawn within a triangle, overlaid with 3 short bars. The symbol appears nowhere in regional iconography, yet has surfaced in unrelated artifacts as far as the Caucasus and the Bolivian Altiplano, always carved shallow, always peripheral, like a watermark or a caution. Linguists believe it is not language but designation, a marker, a kind of ownership. But by whom? Desert legends speak of a people who arrived before sand, before time. They did not build cities. They etched memory, carved not homes, but records. Their name was never spoken, only gestured, hands forming angles, circles, a rhythm of fingers no longer understood. The few who remembered said they carried no tools, only light that bent, and charts that glowed when opened beneath the moon. Of course, these are stories, and yet the slab exists. Archaeologists cannot explain its origin, nor its function. The surrounding terrain holds no signs of quarry or transport. There are no wheel ruts, no foundation stones, no residue of settlement. It is as though the installation was placed, not built, or uncovered from below. Some believe the hexagon is a lid, a cover to something deeper, older, more deliberate, ground-penetrating radar. However, fails at the site. The signals scatter as if the soil refuses to echo. A physicist studying the refracted star pattern suggested a possibility too wild for publication that the grid was not a map of space, but of probability, a model of positions never realized, paths not taken. He described it as a chronology of potentials, moments that might have been, encoded, stored, and projected not for navigation, but for remembrance. But who records what never occurred unless what matters is not what happened, but what almost did? The theory draws a haunting line to myth, tales of timelines diverging, of ancient worlds lost not to flood or flame, but to a decision, a misalignment, a silence. And in that silence, a memory laid into the desert floor, not to warn, but to wait. The site is now under restriction, marked a cultural zone, inaccessible without government clearance. No further research has been published. Yet satellites still pass overhead, and the temperature around the site remains anomalous, a persistent 3. 6 degrees cooler than surrounding sand, regardless of time or season. As if beneath the slab, something breathes, not heat, not sound, but orientation. And when the stars above align with the grid below, once every 18.6 years, during the lunar standstill, the light behaves differently. It doesn't reflect, it enters, and does not return. In a forest near the banks of the Danube, where mist drifts low and the trees grow in unnaturally uniform rows, a stone lies half buried beneath a blanket of moss and ivy. To passers-by, it appears as nothing more than a glacial remnant, an erratic boulder left by retreating ice, but to those who have studied its angles, its symmetry, Its placement, the stone is something else entirely. They call it the witness. It first drew attention during the Austro-Hungarian cartographic surveys of 1893. A surveyor, puzzled by compass interference near the stone, noted in his report that his readings shifted as he approached. At first attributed to iron deposits, further inspection revealed no magnetic source. The effect persisted, and always in the same pattern, a slow rotation of the compass needle counter to Earth's rotation. When mapped precisely, the field formed a spiral, centered not on the stone itself, but a point 30 centimeters beneath its core. The anomaly was ignored for decades. Wars passed, borders shifted, the forest grew denser, but the stone remained. In 1974, a Soviet geomagnetic team revisited the site under the pretext of seismic research. They deployed magnetometers, gravimeters, even early electrostatic sensors. What they recorded contradicted every known model. The field lines around the stone formed closed loops, self-contained, drifting slowly with time, as if orbiting an invisible anchor. One scientist, in a private notebook, described the phenomenon as a magnetic echo, circling something no longer present. Local folklore had long whispered of the stone. Stories told of those who touched it and dreamed not of people or places, but of sequences, shapes repeating, numbers too large to grasp, children drawn to its silence, animals avoiding its shadow. A tale from the nearby village recounts a man who slept against it for 3 nights and awoke with words in a language no one recognized, etched into the frost beside him. Geologists dismiss such claims. Yet, when the stone was scanned using muon tomography, a technique for imaging dense structures, it revealed internal channels, not natural fissures, but geometric voids hexagonal, intersecting, descending deep into the earth. Tunnels, perhaps, or veins. A structure beneath, mapped in absence. Attempts to excavate failed. The ground hardened beneath the tools, not rock, not clay, but something that refused displacement. As if the earth beneath the stone had made a choice. To preserve, the stone itself bears no markings, no script, no carving. Yet when struck with a tuning fork, it resonates, not with a singular tone, but with overtones that shift depending on lunar phase. During new moons, the dominant frequency drops to 18 Hz. During full moons, it rises above 25. Frequencies at the edge of perception. The stone sings in ways the ear does not hear. A physicist studying the tonal response suggested it acted as a lunar receiver, absorbing minute changes in gravitational pull and converting them into vibration. But why, for what purpose? The mass of the moon shifts very little, unless the stone was part of a system, not for measurement, but for memory. Not a sensor, a listener. One page, buried in the archives of a forgotten Eastern European institute, posits an unsettling idea that the stone was placed not to mark where something is, but where something was last, a geological placeholder, an echo of alignment. The pattern of trees around it, the oddly perfect rows, were not planted by humans. Tree rings show they grew simultaneously, centuries ago, their seeds scattered evenly, a spontaneous grid. Botanists can't explain it. The forest follows no known pattern of growth. But the trees bend slightly outward, away from the stone, as if leaning from a forgotten center. From above, the grove forms a mandala. Its outer boundary aligns with solstitial azimuths. The inner rings trace minor lunar standstills. The stone, motionless, anchors a map written not in ink, but in inclination. It is not the only one. Other witness stones, as they are now called, have been identified. one in the Carpathians, one in Armenia, and another deep in the Siberian taiga. Each exhibits similar anomalies: distorted magnetic fields, internal channels, silence. And each marks a site where memory once stood, a convergence, a timing. Some believe the stones are remnants of a forgotten architecture, not buildings, but fixtures, placed to hold rhythm, to remind the earth of its cadence. Others suggest they are fragments of something larger, a lattice that once encircled the globe, now mostly buried, broken, erased. But erased by what or by whom? The Vatican once funded a survey of such stones under the guise of pilgrimage route restoration. That project vanished without report. The lead researcher left a single line in her final communication. It watches from beneath. Today, the stone near the Danube still rests where it always has, covered in moss, whispered about by locals, untouched by time, not forgotten. Just waiting. Because some maps are not meant to lead. Some maps are meant to remain, as if what they point to isn't gone, only sleeping. Inside a weathered church in southern France, beneath a floor of worn limestone tiles, lies a hatch with no hinges and no handle. It is almost invisible unless struck by sunlight through a narrow slit window, only for a few minutes near the autumn equinox, when the beam crosses the nave at an oblique angle. Then, just briefly, a glimmer reveals the metal frame, a circle within a square, fused into the stone. No records mention the hatch, no diagrams mark its presence. It should not be there. In 1987, during minor structural repairs, workers lifted the tile and exposed the hatch for the first time in living memory. Beneath it, a ladder of brass descended into darkness, 10 meters deep, leading to a small chamber carved into bedrock. The room contained no altar, no markings, no artifacts, only a pedestal, and atop it, a sheet of glass, or what appeared to be glass, encased in a thin brass frame. The pane bore no text, no images. But under candlelight, patterns emerged within it, not painted, not etched, but embedded in the substance itself, visible only at certain angles. The patterns resembled waveforms, overlapping curves like interference patterns seen in quantum physics. Yet they pulsed faintly, not with light, but with movement, as though the material breathed. The brass frame was cool to the touch, but the pane itself radiated a strange warmth, fluctuating gently, like a living thing at rest. Attempts to remove the object failed. It would not shift, not with force, not with leverage, as if rooted not to the pedestal, but to something deeper. One priest, overseeing the discovery, described touching its surface and feeling an absence so profound it whispered. He ordered the chamber sealed, but word spread. A scholar of pre-Christian symbology permitted a brief inspection, noticed something odd. The waveforms within the glass, when rotated and aligned by angle, matched known sacred geometries: the flower of life, the golden spiral, the tetractys, but imperfectly, as if distorted by time or translation, like a language remembered imperfectly, reshaped by centuries of silence. More unsettling was the chamber's architecture. The dimensions followed no local standard of measurement. The angles were slightly off from right by less than 1 degree, yet enough to create perceptible dissonance. Sound did not behave normally in the space. A whisper from one wall reached the opposite corner with clarity, while a shout dissipated mid-air. The room was designed to filter frequencies, or perhaps to emphasize one. Tests with tuning forks revealed a curious resonance. At precisely 432 Hz, a tone long associated with musical perfection. The chamber responded. A low hum emerged from the walls, not loud, but pervasive. The pane flickered faintly, its inner patterns vibrating in synchrony. Then, slowly, the flicker ceased. The pane returned to stillness, but the air did not. The chamber retained a charge. Hair rose, eyes watered, watches stopped. The effect lingered for hours. Later examination of church archives uncovered a single passage from 1742 beneath the nave, a mirror not for the face but for the time before, guarded, not for its danger, but for its remembering. No context, no attribution, just a note written in the margin of an otherwise mundane baptismal register. Who built the chamber? The church itself dates to the 12th century, but the stone beneath is older, much older. Geological analysis suggests the carving was done between 3000 and 2500 BCE. No records of excavation exist. No local tradition speaks of catacombs. It is as if the church was built atop something long forgotten or long concealed. One theory suggests the glass-like pane is not an artifact at all, but a window, not literal, but mnemonic. A device that responds to human presence. Not to show images, but to evoke patterns stored in the collective unconscious. Ancient knowledge encoded not in words, but in vibration. When activated, it does not reveal, it recalls. Some believe the chamber was part of a network, a constellation of sites built not to house relics, but to preserve continuity. Not memory, but calibration. Tuning forks for the soul. Places where time folds inward, and the geometry of space hums just slightly off-key, allowing resonance with that which no longer exists, or not yet exists. An even more arcane hypothesis holds that the pane is an interface, not technological in the modern sense, but symbolic, a bridge between realities. It records no image, no sound, but possibility. Not what was, but what could have been. Those who have entered the chamber report dreams afterward, vivid, fragmented, not of places, but of feelings. Weightlessness, acceleration, falling upward, a sense of moving without motion, of arriving without departure. Many describe seeing a circle split by a line, then turning, becoming a spiral. And always, just before waking, a wordless certainty that something once known waits just beyond recall. The chamber is now sealed again, not by decree, but by reverence. The hatch was replaced, the tile reset, the slit window, once the only source of light, now covered by a brass plate bolted from outside. The sun no longer marks the equinox on the stone, but those who remember know the spot. And once a year, they gather at dawn, in silence, and wait, not for proof, but for alignment. Because some maps are not charts of land or sea. They are alignments between perception and pattern, between memory and geometry, between what is and what still echoes in the bones of stone. High above the plains of Anatolia, where hills roll like the backs of sleeping beasts, a small village clings to the edge of a forgotten ridge. Wind scours the stone walls. The sky seems larger here, not expansive, but exposed, like something peeled back. Just beyond the last house, a staircase descends into the earth, not grand, not hewn from temple blocks, but narrow, precise, and so old the stones at the base have worn into crescent curves from the steps of feet long vanished. At the bottom lies a door, framed not in arch or column, but in 3 stacked lintels, each thinner than the last, forming a stepped triangle. Beyond it, a chamber opens, circular, with a floor of tessellated basalt and a ceiling too low to stand. The room is empty. No altar, no inscription, just a shallow basin in the center, filled with dust. At first glance, it seems unimpressive. But when a voice is raised inside, even a whisper, something strange occurs. The sound does not echo. It amplifies. Not in volume, but in clarity. Every syllable returns sharper, as if spoken not once, but twice. Once by the visitor, and once by something beneath. In 1999, an acoustics researcher from Istanbul visited the site. Using spectral analysis, he discovered that the chamber responded to human speech with harmonic reinforcement in very narrow bands, not random frequencies, but specific intervals associated with vowel formation. The room, it seemed, was designed to interact with the language itself, but not any language. Only when certain phonemes were spoken did the effect intensify. When mapped, these phonemes aligned closely with those found in Sumerian, a language officially unrelated to the peoples who once inhabited this ridge. The implications disturbed the research team. Either the chamber was far older than assumed, or the Sumerians inherited phonetic structures from a tradition deeper still, one that had encoded speech not for communication, but resonance. The tessellated floor revealed more. Each stone was subtly different in size, forming a radial pattern that, when digitally mapped, produced a spiral logarithmic curve, one that matched the golden ratio with uncanny accuracy. A spiral designed not to be seen, but stood upon. A geometry for the feet, for movement, perhaps even for ritual. Walking the curve while speaking certain sounds produced a strange sensation. Vertigo without dizziness, a sense of expanding inward. Beneath the chamber, ground-penetrating radar revealed a void. A second chamber, deeper, partially collapsed. Entry was impossible, but during thunderstorms, instruments recorded faint electromagnetic pulses rising from the earth below, matching the rhythm of the Schumann resonance, the natural electromagnetic heartbeat of the planet. If the upper chamber shaped voice, the lower chamber listened. Local legend tells of a time when stones taught the mouth to remember. Elders speak of dreamwalkers, not shamans, but listeners, who descended into the chamber at night and emerged with poems no one had heard before, but all recognized. Words that felt older than memory. A ceramic fragment found near the entrance bears a symbol etched into its glaze, a simple spiral intersected by a horizontal line, flanked by two crescents facing outward. The motif appears elsewhere, most notably in the earliest layers of Çatalhöyük, and again in the megalithic art of Malta. Always associated with thresholds, with sound, with transition. Some have called this site a temple, but it lacks any markers of devotion. Others call it a machine, not mechanical, but mnemonic, a device that modulates frequency through shape, material, and phoneme. A chamber not for worship, but for alignment. One theory proposes that the site was used to recalibrate memory, not personal memory, but collective, linguistic, cognitive, ancestral. A place where sound shaped not just thought, but the thinker. Where language was tuned, not taught. Of all the accounts, one detail persists. Those who have spoken inside the chamber, alone, in silence, report a moment when their voice falters. Not from fear, not from hesitation, but from overlap. A fraction of a second when the words they speak seem to arrive before their mouths move, as if the chamber knows what will be said and whispers it first. The effect is transient, subtle, easy to dismiss, but not forgotten. Some say the chamber is an echo of a time when humans did not learn language, they remembered it. when words were not invented, but uncovered, like buried instruments. And when spoken in the right place, in the right tone, at the right angle, they did not just convey meaning. They opened doors. The site remains unmarked, protected by geography and indifference. There is no fence, no sign, but those who approach with voice in mind may find more than ruins. They may find resonance, not of sound, but of self. Hidden in the salt-stained cliffs of the Portuguese coast, where waves wear stone into smooth hollows and seabirds cry into silence, lies a passage carved not by nature, but by hand. Narrow and steep, the tunnel descends through limestone into a chamber lit only by a narrow slit high above, where sunlight pierces for mere minutes each year during the winter solstice. The locals avoid the place. They call it a boca que não devolve som, the mouth that returns no sound. When archaeologists first entered in the 1970s, they found a space neither large nor ornate. The chamber was roughly octagonal, its walls inlaid with vertical grooves like the ribs of a vast instrument. No decoration, no altar, just the grooves, each varying slightly in depth and width, yet all angled toward a single point, a shallow recess in the far wall where the stone shone darker, as if burned or polished by centuries of touch. Tests revealed something stranger still. When certain frequencies were played, low, sustained tones, the walls began to vibrate in specific harmonic modes, forming standing waves that clustered not at the center of the room, but at the recess itself. And within that space, those who stood still described sensations not easily categorized: pressure without contact, heat without temperature, the sense of being watched from within. Acoustic modeling showed the grooves to function as waveguides, channels not for air or water, but for resonance. The room did not amplify sound. It focused it, not into volume, but density, into presence. Further inspection revealed traces of pigment along the grooves, not paint, but mineral dust, iron oxides, crushed lapis, traces of cinnabar, all substances known for conductivity, magnetism, or luminescence. It was as if the very walls had once shimmered in certain light, activated not by torch or sun, but by vibration. In 2004, a physicist suggested that the room was designed not for human voices, but for the sound of the sea. When wind struck the cliff just right, waves entering a nearby cavern produced infrasound, below human hearing, yet powerful enough to be felt. The tunnel, then, may have functioned as a funnel, guiding these subsonic pulses into the chamber, turning it into a listening post. But for what there is an old mariner's tale along this coast, speaking of a time when the stone beneath the shore wept when the stars were wrong. Some dismissed it as poetic nonsense. But when star maps from 10,000 BCE were aligned with the chamber's slit window, a chilling detail emerged. The solstice light passed through precisely as the constellation Eridanus reached zenith. Eridanus, the mythic river of stars, associated in several traditions with paths to the underworld. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the chamber's architects left no other clue. On the floor, half buried beneath silt and sand, a slab was uncovered bearing an inscription, not in Latin, not in Iberian, but a script of angular symbols known only from a few undeciphered artifacts found in the Canary Islands and West Sahara. A language that seems to emerge at the edge of memory, where written history dissolves into oral dream. The symbols, when traced and rearranged into radial symmetry, formed a shape uncannily similar to known representations of gravitational waves, patterns only recently detected by instruments the size of cities. And yet here, encoded in an ancient slab, was the same ripple, the same pulse. It is tempting to believe the chamber was built to receive something, not from the sea, not from above, but from time itself. One theory holds that the chamber is an inertial anchor, a place where temporal drift can be felt more acutely, where cycles larger than a human lifespan press against the present. That to stand within is to feel not a message, but a weight, not information, but recursion. During certain tides, the chamber vibrates faintly, even in silence. Instruments left inside register minor electromagnetic interference, unpatterned but persistent. The grooves hum with pressure imperceptible to ears, like fingers brushing the edges of memory. No one lives near the site anymore. The last house was abandoned in 1991. Locals speak of nights when the wind shifts and voices, not words, are heard beneath the cliff. Not calling, not singing, just being. The chamber is sealed now, not by law, but by rust and time. Yet the wind still finds its way through the slit each solstice. Light touches stone for less than 2 minutes, just enough to cast the recess into gold, just enough to remind the rock that something once passed through here. Not to stay, but to echo. Because some places are not meant to hold meaning. They are meant to remember the shape of meaning. Even after the words have been lost. Beneath the frozen crust of northern Mongolia, where the wind carries no warmth even in summer and the stars appear closer than clouds, lies a basin surrounded by hills that curve too symmetrically to be natural. Satellite imagery first identified it in 1996, a near-perfect ellipse, 1.4 kilometers across, devoid of trees or habitation. The soil darker than its surroundings. At the center stands a single standing stone, uncarved, unshaped, yet uncannily vertical. It is known locally as Kuk Chaimi, the silent blue. To approach the stone is to enter a space that resists attention. Animals turn back. Machinery malfunctions. Even compasses spin. The air thickens. Sound softens. Not with silence, but with saturation, as if every footstep is absorbed, not by snow, but by something deeper, waiting beneath. In 2001, a group of independent researchers conducted a ground-penetrating survey of the basin. What they discovered remains partially classified, but declassified summaries speak of subsurface anomalies, concentric rings of high-density material layered beneath the soil, spaced with mathematical precision. Not natural strata, but engineered layers, each possessing different magnetic signatures. When mapped, the pattern mirrored acoustic baffles, structures used to scatter or cancel sound. But what would such a mechanism be doing beneath an empty plain? More curiously, the central standing stone showed a resonance profile similar to crystalline quartz, despite being composed of basalt. When exposed to low-frequency sound, it vibrated, not uniformly, but in a pulsing rhythm, increasing in amplitude every 26 minutes. A cycle that did not correspond to lunar tides or solar flux. But when the pattern was overlaid on a model of Earth's magnetic field drift over the past 12,000 years, the match was unsettlingly precise. The implication was startling. The stone did not just vibrate with present frequencies, it echoed change, a geological metronome marking the planet's magnetic heartbeat, encoding reversals, lulls, surges, not recording, resonating. Those who stood beside it for prolonged periods described sensations ranging from mild dizziness to vivid waking dreams. Not of people or scenes, but of motion descent, spiraling paths, the sensation of moving downward through layers of fluid light. One described hearing tones in harmonic sequence, as if someone were tuning a forgotten scale. Another claimed to see an array of geometric symbols suspended in darkness, turning slowly like celestial gears. No cameras functioned for long within 50 meters of the stone. Batteries drained. Film fogged. Digital sensors recorded blank white noise. Yet on rare occasions, mechanical watches continued ticking, but gained time, as if the very flow of seconds altered in proximity. There is a tale, rarely told, of a time before the forests receded and the glaciers shrank, when a people lived near the basin who worshipped no gods but followed rhythms. They did not build temples or bury their dead. They sang in circles and vanished without trace. Only one carving remains, found 70 kilometers east, etched into a cliff face, depicting concentric spirals wrapped around a vertical line. No figures. No animals. Just the shape. And below it, 5 glyphs, mirrored vertically. These same glyphs appear nowhere else except in a forgotten monastery mural in northern Tibet, now faded beneath layers of soot and moss. There, too, the glyphs surround a stone, this time shaped like a droplet, suspended by nothing, glowing with inner fire. Myth, perhaps, or memory misshapen by time. One theory, hushed among academic circles, posits that the basin is not a site, but a lock. That the standing stone is the key, not to a chamber, but to alignment. Not to a location, but to a moment. That beneath the soil lies not a structure, but a frequency. A chord struck so precisely that it continues to reverberate long after the hand is gone. Magnetometers placed near the stone fluctuate unpredictably during the March equinox. Not sharply, but rhythmically. A subtle wave rising every 13 minutes, falling again. No known source explains it. When plotted across time, the wave matches historical records of auroral activity. Inverted. As if what occurs above the poles has a shadow here, below the ground. A final. Unsettling detail satellite scans have occasionally captured flashes of infrared from the site during deep winter. The surrounding land remains inert, but the basin glows faintly. Not with heat, but with difference, as though the stone remembers warmth, or pulls it from somewhere else. The villagers keep away. They say the ground hums after snow, that voices, not human, not language, rise through frost, not calling, but reminding that the stone does not wait. It listens, and when the sky turns just right and the cycles fold again, it may speak, not aloud, but into the bones of those who stand too long. Because some places are not messages, they are answers waiting for the right question. Inside the northern reaches of what was once Prussia, now a borderland of dense pine forests and moss-covered ruins. A monastery collapsed long ago under the weight of fire and silence. Its name has vanished from maps, and its records, save for a single surviving folio, lie buried beneath layers of political erasure. But among the scattered stones and tangled roots, there remains a chamber, underground, windowless, and precisely octagonal, which resists decay more than logic permits. The chamber's ceiling curves inwards, forming a shallow dome of intersecting ribs, each joining at a central oculus sealed with leaded glass. Through it, no light enters, yet inside, even in the absence of flame, the walls seem dimly visible, as though lit from behind stone. The walls bear no frescoes, no crosses, no saints. Only a repeating pattern, a series of spirals intersected by straight lines, painted in a pigment so dark it drinks vision, and outlined in a metallic dust that tarnishes every tool but remains untouched itself. What scholars recovered from the surviving folio hints that this chamber was not for prayer, nor burial, but for correction, not of doctrine, of time. The manuscript, dated to the 14th century, speaks obliquely of a turning that was not told and an hour that passed twice, yet was felt only once. It describes a ritual of alignment performed at dawn every third equinox, wherein monks chanted numerals rather than scripture, facing cardinal points not by compass, but by pressure beneath their feet. One line stands out, inked in a hand more frantic than the rest. They told us we followed Rome. But Rome, too, followed a clock, and the clock was set in shadow. The structure itself is aligned not to true north, but to a deviation of 11 degrees west, the approximate offset between solar and sidereal time. The chamber, in essence, is misaligned by design, a temple of discrepancy. But why, in 1994, researchers attempted to model the geometry of the space. They found that when mapping the angles of the octagon against historical calendar reforms, a pattern emerged. Each corner corresponded not to space, but to date, the corners matching the Julian-Gregorian shift, the Council of Nicaea, the Reformation of the Roman Fasti. The room was not oriented to the heavens, but to revisions of how humans measured them. It was a calendar of edits, a clock of corrections, and at its center, below the oculus, lies a pedestal bearing no symbol but a shallow depression, circular, smooth, the diameter of a human skull. When touched, the stone is warm. When measured, it is colder than ice. There is no reason for this. There is no explanation. Some believe the chamber served as a metatemporal reference, a place where fluctuations in timekeeping could be sensed, maybe even reset, that those who entered did not pray, but recalibrated, aligned not with stars, but with the memory of when stars were trusted. This brings us to a disquieting hypothesis. In the 1990s, a fringe group of European historians proposed what they called the phantom time hypothesis, the claim that nearly 300 years of history, particularly between the 8th and 11th centuries, were fabricated, inserted by emperors, codified by scribes, reinforced by religious institutions. Critics dismissed it as absurd, yet the chamber's very geometry seems to reference it. 3 corners unaccounted for in astronomical alignment, 3 missing stars in an otherwise perfect sidereal ceiling map painted later in the same region, 3 days added to the Julian calendar by papal decree, then quietly redacted. If these were errors, they are remarkably consistent. And if they were deliberate, they point to something darker, the possibility that what we call history is less a record than a scaffold, a structure, built not to remember, but to constrain. That time, as taught, is not the river, but the dam. Within the chamber, during solar zenith on March 21st, a faint vibration hums along the floor, unmeasurable, yet palpable. Watches stall, pens leak, and voices falter. The last known entry into the chamber was made by a linguist in 2007. She was studying the inscriptions from the folio and hoped to match syntax to known liturgical scripts. Her final journal entry reads, "This place does not speak in words. It speaks in gaps. What it hides is not a story. It is a whole." No further expeditions followed. Today, the ruin is overgrown, the chamber sealed not by lock, but by forgetting. Yet beneath it, stone remembers the numbers once chanted. And each March, as shadows lengthen, the pine needles tremble, though no wind moves, because some corrections do not fix, they fold, and what they fold away does not always stay gone. Far below the basalt ridges of eastern Ethiopia, where shifting dust reveals stone older than bones and the stars rise without distortion, a cleft in the desert opens like a forgotten breath. Locals call it Daga Fi, the hollow place, and warn that even the wind avoids its mouth. Few approach, fewer return. The ones who do speak little, except to say that silence is louder there. In 2015, a satellite anomaly detected a heat signature from the region, not from the sun or tectonics, but from something constant and precise. A square outline, buried beneath 5 meters of dry silt, emitted a narrow thermal gradient 1.7 degrees warmer than surrounding rock, never fluctuating. Not with time, not with season. A small team excavated the site. What they uncovered was not a building, but a floor. Black stone inlaid with a grid of thin copper lines, etched deep. Each segment engraved with a single repeating symbol, a curve intersected by 2 horizontal bars, like a horizon bisected. The floor bore no walls, no ceiling, yet when they stood upon it, GPS units failed, compasses drifted, and shadows lengthened unnaturally, stretching farther than the sun allowed. When the grid was mapped, it matched the layout of a 12x12 matrix, 144 tiles, each slightly varied in alignment, as if forming a code. But when the coordinates of the variations were plotted on a globe, they pointed to ancient sites long buried or long questioned Mohenjo-Daro, Göbekli Tepe, Lake Vostok, the ruins beneath Lake Titicaca, and the submerged pillars off Yonaguni. Each tile was a vector, each vector a memory, but memory of what beneath the floor. Ground-penetrating scans revealed a cavity shaped like a dome, empty, dry, and perfectly spherical. No entrance, no ladder, just a void, and at its apex, directly beneath the center of the grid, a second signal, not thermal, not magnetic, but sonic. A single tone, unwavering, ultra-low frequency, 19.87 Hz. A pitch below hearing, yet not below effect. Researchers experienced nausea, visual distortion, and the sensation of movement in still air. One described the feeling as being gently pulled toward a place I couldn't remember. Another collapsed after 6 minutes and wept without reason. The tone never stopped. It continues even now. No power source, no mechanism, just vibration, rising from the earth, as if the stone itself hums from something deeper or older. Analysis of the floor's copper traces showed isotopic ratios inconsistent with terrestrial mining. No known deposit on Earth matches its exact composition. One theory suggests a meteoric origin. Another, more quietly held, proposes an artificial source, not built here, but brought. Some whisper the site is a remnant, not of a civilization, but of a calibration. A mechanism embedded in the earth to anchor something we once needed but have forgotten how to use. Not a machine in the mechanical sense, but a boundary marker in time. A reset point. A signal flare for consciousness. Stories in nearby villages recall a night that lasted a day, when stars remained fixed in the sky and shadows never moved. It happened long ago, before calendars, before herding, when fire was still begged from stone. The old ones say the grid sang then, and people fell into dreamless sleep, waking with no memory except the sense that something had been taken. No one knows what. Yet language in the region carries an anomaly, an entire set of verbs with no modern referent. Actions once understood, but now unnamed. Linguists call them ghost verbs. One translates loosely to remember before remembering. Another, to hold what has not occurred. These words exist only here, nowhere else. A stone tablet, recovered nearby and carbon-dated to over 9,000 years ago, bears a carved eye split vertically, beneath which the same double-bar symbol appears. The eye looks upward, but its gaze is not toward the sky. It is inward, Today, the site is covered again at the government's quiet instruction. Officially, it does not exist. The floor was reburied, the equipment removed, but the tone continues, vibrating through basalt and memory. Travelers still report headaches when crossing the region. Dreams recur, and birds do not fly overhead. Because some remnants are not ruins, they are instructions, left for something not yet returned, or something we were never meant to find again. In the dense green shadows of the Bolivian lowlands, where rivers carve paths older than dynasties and trees whisper in a language older than breath, there lies a clearing that appears only briefly each year, when rains recede and the clouds retreat to higher ground. A satellite scan first marked it as anomalous, a perfect circle of flattened vegetation, 86 meters across, without path, trail, or ruin. No signs of fire, no signs of cultivation. Yet something had pressed downward with precision, once and never again. Locals call it el espejo sin imagen, the mirror without a reflection. It holds no shrine, no altar, but when one stands at its center during certain dusk hours, the sounds of the forest shift. Birds stop, insects fall silent, and a faint hum, not from above, but from below, can be felt through the soles of the feet. Not heard, but known. In 1972, a Brazilian ethnographer seeking oral traditions stumbled upon the place during his travels with the Tucana people. An elder told him a story of a circle where time bent, and where the sky once touched the earth and left a mark. He was advised not to sleep within the circle, but curiosity eclipsed caution. That night, under a moonless sky, he dreamed not of jungle or village, but of immense towers reflected in still water, rising into an atmosphere filled with slow-moving light. He recorded the dream. Then, 3 weeks later, vanished without trace. What remains is his notebook, recovered from a parcel mailed before his disappearance. Inside it, sketches of the clearing from above, a circle surrounded by faint lines etched in the forest floor. Not random, radial, geometrically precise. And when overlaid with the positions of certain stars during solstices 12,000 years ago, the lines align with Sirius, Vega, and Deneb. Not the current triangle of summer skies, but its inverse, as seen from a different pole, as if the clearing remembers a sky that no longer exists. Geologists sent to examine the area found the soil oddly compressed, as if something massive and smooth had once rested there. Beneath the top layer, they found a fine gray dust, chemically inert, metallic in trace, but with no identifiable source. It bore microscopic spherules, not unlike those formed in atmospheric entry. No artifact was recovered. Yet every compass brought to the site spun gently, not wildly, not erratically, but with a soft insistence, like a bowl rolling slowly to rest. Theories diverge wildly. Some say it was a landing site, not of craft, but of memory, a convergence point where distant lines of knowledge once intersected, anchored to the earth not by technology, but by intention. Others propose it is a reset point, like those found elsewhere in deserts, tundras, and steppe, places that resist narrative yet hum with design. Within the Tucana cosmology, there exists a motif rarely found elsewhere, the concept of places that look upward while facing inward, not temples, not tombs, but mirrors designed not to show reflection, but inversion. A memory of the world turned inside out, when what was above became below, and what was within became without. The mirror, without a reflection, they say, is not empty. It is full of what has been sealed. A mathematician once overlaid the radial pattern with hyperbolic functions. discovering that the angles formed a structure resembling an unfolded five-dimensional tesseract, a geometric object theorized but never found. When plotted across time, the lines point not only to space, but to moments the Younger Dryas, the Sumerian flood tablet, the Olmec long count reset, the Gregorian reform, always near events of disjunction, always near points of narrative fracture, as if the circle marks not space, but interruption. The center of the clearing bears one last feature, nearly invisible, save in satellite heat maps. A cold spot, circular, 2 meters wide, 8 degrees below ambient. It persists through seasons. Rain, sun, fire. Nothing warms it. Nothing changes it. Some say it is the last breath of something that once waited there, not to arrive, but to be remembered. Because some absences are not losses. They are instructions in reverse. What is not there may be exactly what was left behind. Deep in the limestone labyrinths of the Carpathian Mountains, where frost clings even to memory and trails vanish beneath falling moss, a structure known only through whispers lies forgotten beneath a cairn of collapsed stones. It is not marked on any map. Its location passed through no royal archive. And yet, among the oldest shepherding families, there exists a tale of the chamber that marks forgetting, a place where names go to be unspoken, and where history folds itself inward like parchment pressed between stone. It was first uncovered, accidentally, during the Second World War. A fleeing partisan unit, seeking shelter from the bitter wind, took refuge among the ruins. They discovered an opening beneath shattered columns, blocked by roots and soil. After clearing it, they descended into a space of angles that did not conform to Euclidean sense. Hallways that turned without direction, staircases that sloped upward while descending. Time moved strangely there. Watches broke. Hunger disappeared. One soldier reported hearing a voice, his mother's, though she had died years before, reciting a lullaby in a language he could not name. At the center of the ruin, they found a chamber shaped not as a circle, but as a 12-pointed star. Each point led into a short corridor, terminating in a niche. In the center stood a single monolith, rectangular, smooth, unadorned, and absorbing all light. It reflected nothing. Sound stopped near it. The very air changed. Breathing thickened, and thought, for some, grew slow and cold, as though soaked in forgetting. Later, when historians attempted to trace its origin, they encountered a peculiar absence. No monastery had been recorded there, no structure of Roman, Gothic, or Slavic origin aligned with its design. The stone used in its construction matched no local quarry, its mineral content suggesting high-altitude metamorphic compression found only in tectonic fault zones thousands of kilometers away. One passage, buried in a 13th century chronicle by a monk named Matthias de Halleck, made oblique mention of a vault without doors, whose every corridor returns not knowledge, but subtraction, a sanctum of unlearning. He warned that those who entered should not speak, lest they carry the forgetting with them. His account was dismissed as metaphor, an allegory for heretical deviation. But the location he described, vague though it was, matched the folds of this ridge. Those few who have entered since, archaeologists, mystics, surveyors, describe different effects, but a common conclusion: the place does not want to be understood. Instruments fail. Maps drawn by hand contradict themselves. Photographs develop blank. Not black, not white, just void. Yet the walls are etched. Delicate. Fine, too precise to have been cut by primitive tools. The etchings follow no script, but patterns, looping curves, recursive spirals, bifurcating paths that resemble the branching of neurons or the flow of time through folded space. When traced, they produce no legible shape. But when observed at a distance, under flickering torchlight, they resemble something else entirely. A face, not human, not beast, but symmetrical and vast, as though the chamber itself watches those within. Not malicious, not curious, just aware. Some believe the place was constructed not to store memory, but to contain its absence. A vacuum against narrative. A site built to suppress what once was true by creating a geometry that rejects continuity. That reshapes history not through lies, but through erosion, wearing away certainty, layer by layer, until only fragments remain, contextless and hollow. One theory proposes that the chamber is a keystone in an architecture of forgetfulness. A point of convergence where timelines once divided and were sewn imperfectly together, that the odd events scattered across history, lost cities, repeating disasters, phantom dynasties, are echoes of this stitching, not errors, but consequences. The corridors resonate faintly with low frequencies not heard, but felt. A dull pressure in the jaw, a rhythm behind the eyes. When mapped, the vibrations correspond to patterns of brainwave activity associated with deep trance, memory suppression, and theta dreaming. The structure, then, may not be inert. It may still function, but function for whom and for what purpose? One final detail emerges from a report never published, filed by a Polish researcher in 2003. She spent 3 hours inside the structure. When she emerged, she wept uncontrollably, then recited a passage in flawless Sogdian, a language dead for over a millennium. She had no prior knowledge of it. The words she spoke translated. Roughly, we were given time as a mirror, but they taught us to see it as a wall. No one has entered since. The cairn above collapsed again in 2017. No effort was made to reopen it, perhaps because some structures do not decay. They fade by design, because some places are not built to be remembered. They are built to make forgetting possible, and in that forgetting, something waits, not to be found, but to be left untouched. Now the light has dimmed. The flame no longer flickers, but rests, faint, warm, as if drawn inward by the stones themselves, across the chambers, ruins, circles, and vaults we've passed. A thread winds softly through silence, not straight, not taut, but alive. A line sewn between echoes, between absences too precise to be coincidence. Each place we visited held nothing loud, no declaration, no monument screaming meaning. Only the hum beneath the soil, the whisper through carved stone, the weight of symbols that refused to explain themselves. They stood not as answers, but as fractures, seams in a surface we've long mistaken for whole. There is a silence that grows louder the more one listens. And in these hidden sights, it thickens not with emptiness, but with intent, like the pause between breaths, like the space between stars. So many of the structures, buried, sealed, erased, resist not time, but narrative. They do not crumble, they dissolve. As though forgetting was part of their purpose, as though history, once misaligned, became a room we no longer remember how to exit. But perhaps the question has never been about what we have forgotten. Perhaps it has always been about what we were told to remember instead. Let the names fade now. Let the coordinates rest. What matters is the sensation that lingers, that chilled pause at the base of the spine, the moment of hesitation before certainty, the suspicion that beneath the maps and calendars and polished facts, Something older breathes, and it is not done yet. Some truths do not sleep. They wait, not for revelation, but for resonance. So if the quiet stays with you tonight, just let it. Not everything hidden is lost. Some things are hidden because they are true,